The city of Caldwell woke up early. The tram lines hummed before the sun was fully up. Street vendors rolled out their carts. Workers in heavy boots walked fast along the stone paths. The city was always moving, always loud, always full of people who had somewhere to be. Roy had worked the morning tram route for 11 years. He knew every face on that line. He knew the old man who always fell asleep by the second stop. He knew the woman who brought fresh bread in a cloth bag every Tuesday. He knew the school children who pushed each other near the doors and pretended they did not know each other when their parents were watching. Roy knew everyone. That was why, on a cold gray morning in early autumn, he noticed the one passenger he did not know. It was small. That was the first thing he saw. Small and sitting very still near the back of the tram close to the window. At first Roy thought it was a child wrapped in a dark coat. But then the tram shifted around a corner and the early light came through the glass and Roy saw the scales. Green and dark brown like wet bark on an old tree. Small wings folded flat against its back. A tail curled neatly around its feet. A young dragon hatchling, alone, sitting on the tram like it was the most normal thing in the world. Roy almost said something. He almost walked back there and asked where its family was, who it belonged to, why it was alone. But the hatchling was not making trouble. It sat with a worn leather satchel held in both front claws, pressed against its chest like it was holding something important inside. Its eyes were fixed on the window. It did not look at anyone. Roy let it be. He watched it from the front, between stops. The hatchling did not fidget. It did not look around at the other passengers the way young creatures usually did. It just sat and watched the city move past the glass with eyes that were too quiet for something so small. The tram reached the far end of the line. Most passengers got off near the market or the work yards. The hatchling stayed on until the last stop, a quiet corner at the edge of the older part of the city where not many people went in the mornings. It climbed down from the seat carefully, satchel still held tight, and walked off without looking back. Roy watched it go from the door of the tram. He had a return route to run. He could not follow. He told himself it was not his business anyway. But that evening, when he finished his shift and sat down with a cup of tea, he kept thinking about those eyes. Not frightened. Not angry. Just empty in a way that did not fit something so young. Like whatever it had been feeling for a long time had quietly used itself up. The next morning the hatchling was back. Same seat. Same satchel. Same stillness. Roy noticed that it had not brought food. Most young ones carried something to eat, a wrapped piece of meat, a hard roll, something. This one had nothing except the satchel. Its small stomach made a sound near the first stop that Roy heard even from the front, and the hatchling pressed the satchel tighter to its chest as if embarrassed. Roy said nothing. He reached into his own coat pocket, found the folded piece of flatbread his wife had packed for him, and placed it gently on the seat closest to the back when the hatchling was looking out the window. He walked back to the front without a word. By the time the tram reached the third stop, the bread was gone. Roy did not look back. But he felt something shift slightly in the air, the way a room changes when someone inside it finally breathes. This went on for 4 more days. Every morning the hatchling came. Every morning it rode to the last stop. Every evening Roy watched it return on the last tram before dark, climbing back on at the far end of the line, riding all the way back through the city in the opposite direction, getting off somewhere near the old worker flats by the canal. Always the same empty eyes on the way out. Always the same empty eyes on the way back. Other passengers noticed too after a while. A woman who worked at the post hall whispered to her friend about it one morning. An older man who rode every day just to have somewhere to go watched the hatchling with a soft, sad look and never said anything out loud. Nobody asked it anything. Nobody moved to sit near it. They all just let it ride. Roy understood that. He understood the unspoken agreement people make when they can see that something is hurting but they do not know how to help yet. You leave space. You do not push. You watch carefully and you wait. But Roy was not built for just waiting. On the 5th morning, when the hatchling climbed aboard and moved to its usual seat, Roy made a quiet decision. He would run his route. He would do his job. And when his shift ended, he would walk to the last stop himself and find out where that small creature went every single day. Because in 11 years on the morning tram, Roy had never once seen a young one travel alone without a reason. And something told him, deep and certain, the way you feel the weather before it turns, that the reason behind this one was not small at all. He folded his hands around the tram controls and kept his eyes forward. But in the back of his mind he was already following. Roy told no one what he was planning. He finished his morning shift, handed the tram controls to the next worker, and pulled his coat tight against the autumn wind. The sky was the color of old iron. The streets near the end of the line were quieter than the rest of the city, older too, with cracked stone paths and buildings that had not been painted in a long time. He walked to the last stop and waited. The hatchling came off the tram at the usual time, satchel pressed to its chest, eyes already fixed somewhere ahead. It moved quickly for something so small. Its clawed feet made soft sounds on the stone. It did not look around. It did not stop. It walked like it had made this journey so many times that its body did it without thinking. Roy followed at a distance. Far enough that the hatchling would not hear him. Close enough that he would not lose it around a corner. They walked for about 10 minutes through the older streets. The buildings here were mostly empty. A few windows were boarded up. A stray cat watched them both from a low wall and said nothing. Then the hatchling stopped. Roy stepped into a doorway and went still. Ahead, set back from the street behind a low iron fence, was a large building. It had wide doors made for creatures much bigger than people. The sign above the entrance was still there, though the paint was faded and one corner had come loose and bent downward. Roy could still read it. Caldwell Dragon Medical Center. The doors were chained shut. The windows were dark. Dry leaves had gathered against the base of the fence in a long, undisturbed line. Nobody had opened those doors in months. The hatchling walked to the fence and curled its small fingers around two of the iron bars. It pressed its face between them and looked at the building. It stood there without moving, without making a sound, just looking at the shut doors like it was waiting for them to open. Roy stayed in the doorway. He watched for a long time. An hour passed. Maybe more. The wind came and went. A few people moved along the far end of the street, too distant to notice the small creature standing at the fence. The hatchling did not sit down. It did not shift its weight or look away. It just held the bars and looked at the building. Roy had seen patients before. He had seen people wait at hospital doors, at train platforms, at windows facing the wrong direction. He knew what waiting looked like when it had gone on too long. When the person waiting had stopped believing the thing they were waiting for would come, but could not make themselves leave either. That was what he saw in the hatchling. Not hope exactly. Something past hope. Something quieter and more painful than hope. Around midday, a woman came out of the building next to the medical center. She was old, with a heavy shawl and a shopping basket. She stopped when she saw the hatchling. Her face did not look surprised. It looked the way faces look when they see something they have seen before and do not know how to fix. She went inside without speaking. A few minutes later she came back out and set a small wrapped piece of food on top of the fence post nearest the hatchling. She patted the post once, gently, and went on her way. The hatchling looked at the food for a moment. Then it picked it up carefully and placed it in the satchel without eating it. Roy wondered if it was saving it for someone. At mid-afternoon the hatchling finally let go of the bars. It stood back from the fence and looked at the building for one more moment. Its wings pressed flat. Its tail dropped low. Then it turned and walked back toward the tram stop with the same quiet steadiness it always carried, and Roy followed it again from a distance. On the tram ride back, Roy sat 2 rows behind the hatchling. He watched it take out the wrapped food from the satchel, look at it, then put it back again. It leaned its head against the window. Its eyes were open, but they were not really seeing the city outside. Roy could not stop thinking about that sign. Caldwell Dragon Medical Center. Closed. Chained. When he got home that evening he went straight to the small desk in the corner of the kitchen where he kept old city papers and notices. He dug through them until he found one from several months ago. A short notice, the kind that gets printed in the back pages where most people never look. Caldwell Dragon Medical Center. Temporary closure. All current patients transferred to alternative care facilities. Residents with inquiries may contact the city records office. Transferred. Roy sat back in his chair. Someone had been a patient there. Someone the hatchling was coming to find every single day. Someone it had not been told was moved. The center had closed and the patients had been sent somewhere else, and nobody had thought to make sure a small hatchling knew where its person had gone. Or maybe someone had tried to tell it. Maybe the hatchling had not understood. Maybe it had been told and simply could not accept it, and so it kept coming back to the last place it knew. Roy folded the notice carefully and put it in his coat pocket. He looked at the wall for a while without speaking. Then he stood up, put his coat back on, and told his wife he needed to make a stop at the city records office first thing in the morning. She looked at him the way she always did when he got that particular look on his face. "Who is it this time?" she asked quietly. Roy pulled on his boots. "Small one," he said. "Rides the tram alone." The city records office opened at 8 in the morning. Roy was standing outside at 7:10. He had not slept well. He kept seeing the hatchling at the fence, small fingers wrapped around the iron bars, face pressed between them, waiting for doors that were never going to open on their own. He had made tea twice in the night and left both cups unfinished on the counter. His wife had not said anything when she found him already dressed at 6. She had just handed him a folded piece of paper with the records office address written on it, because she had already looked it up herself, and kissed him on the cheek and told him to eat something before he left. He ate half a roll on the walk over. The records office was a wide, low building near the center of the city with tall shelves visible through the front windows. A young man named Dale unlocked the front door at exactly 8 and found Roy already waiting on the step with the closed notice in his hand. Dale looked at the notice. He looked at Roy. He stepped aside without a word and let him in. Roy explained what he needed. A patient record. A transfer record. Anything connected to the Caldwell Dragon Medical Center closure from several months back. He did not know the mother dragon's name. He only knew someone small was looking for her and had been looking for a very long time. Dale was quiet for a moment. Then he went to the back and came out with a wide flat ledger and 2 folders tied with brown string. They sat at the long table near the window and went through everything together. It took most of the morning. The closure records were not organized well. Pages were out of order. Some transfer entries had been filled in by hand and were hard to read. A few patient names had been recorded only partially, with gaps where information had not been collected properly before the center was shut down. Roy worked through it slowly. He turned each page carefully. Dale helped where he could, reading out entries when Roy's eyes got tired from the small handwriting. It was close to midday when Roy found it. A single entry near the back of the second folder. A female dragon, adult, listed under an old district name that no longer matched current city maps. Admitted for deep injury to the left wing and side. Treated for several weeks. When the center closed, transferred to the Aldrin Recovery Ward on the far east side of the city. Roy read it twice. Then he sat back and let out a long breath. She was alive. The entry said her condition at the time of transfer was serious but stable. Too weak to be moved far. Too weak, Roy thought, to send word to anyone. And the Aldrin Recovery Ward was on the complete opposite side of Caldwell, past the bridge roads and the industrial yards, far beyond anywhere the tram line near the canal flats would take a small hatchling. He copied the address onto a fresh piece of paper in his coat pocket notebook. He thanked Dale, who nodded and said nothing, which was the right thing to say. Roy walked out into the midday street and stood on the step for a moment. The east side of the city was not a short journey. Even for an adult who knew the roads, it took 2 tram changes and a long walk through streets that were not always easy to move through alone. For something small, unfamiliar with that part of the city, carrying nothing but a worn satchel and a quiet kind of grief, it would be nearly impossible. The hatchling had been riding back and forth to a closed building every day because it did not know there was somewhere else to go. Roy put the notebook back in his pocket and started walking. He did not go home first. He walked to the tram yard where his colleague Walter was finishing up a midday run, and he asked Walter a few quiet questions about the east side routes. Walter drew a rough map on the back of a schedule sheet and handed it over without asking why. Roy studied it on the walk home. That evening he sat at the kitchen table and looked at the address written in his notebook for a long time. His wife sat across from him with her own cup of tea and waited. She knew his silences. She knew which ones meant he was deciding something and which ones meant he had already decided and was just catching up to himself. This one was the second kind. "I am going to take it there," Roy said. His wife nodded once. "The hatchling," he said. "It does not know where its mother is. It has been going to the wrong place every day. I found where she was moved. It is far too far for something that small to go alone. So I am going to take it." His wife wrapped both hands around her cup. "When?" she asked. "Day after tomorrow," Roy said. "I am off shift. I will go to the tram stop in the morning and wait for it. I will show it the address. I do not know if it can read city script, but I will find a way to make it understand." He paused. "It might not trust me," he said. "It does not know me. It has never spoken to me. It might just walk past." His wife was quiet for a moment. "You have been giving it bread every morning for almost 2 weeks, she said. Roy looked up. She was looking at him steadily over her cup with the calm expression she wore when she felt she had said exactly enough. Roy looked back down at the notebook. He thought about the hatchling pressing its face between those iron bars. He thought about the wrapped food placed carefully in the satchel, saved and not eaten. He thought about what it meant to keep going back to a place long after the reason for going had changed, simply because you had no other direction to face. He closed the notebook. "Day after tomorrow," he said again, quietly, more to himself than to her. And that was the end of the deciding. Roy did not plan to tell anyone. He had meant to handle it quietly. Go to the stop, wait for the hatchling, show it the address and take it across the city himself. Simple. Plain. No fuss. But the morning before his day off, he arrived at the tram yard early to return a borrowed schedule sheet to Walter, and Walter took one look at his face and asked what was wrong. Roy told him. Just the short version. The hatchling, the closed center, the records office, the address on the east side. Walter did not say anything for a moment. He folded the schedule sheet slowly and set it down on the bench beside him. Then he said, "The East Bridge roads are complicated if you do not know them. I know a driver on that route. I can call him tonight." Roy opened his mouth to say it was fine, he could manage. Walter was already writing the name down on a scrap of paper. That was how it started. By the time Roy reached the tram for his morning shift, Walter had spoken to two other workers in the yard. One of them, a tall, quiet woman named Lena who handled the east side routes, had already offered to meet Roy at the bridge crossing with a valid travel pass for the connecting tram. She knew the ward. She had taken a family member there once, years ago. She knew which entrance to use and which ones were hard for smaller creatures to manage. Roy had not asked her. She had simply decided. His regular passengers noticed something was different that morning. Roy was not unfriendly, but he was quieter than usual, more in his own head. The older man who rode every day just to have somewhere to go watched Roy from his usual seat near the middle of the tram and said nothing for 3 stops. Then he said, "It is about the small one, is it not?" It was not really a question. Roy glanced back at him. The man's name was Gerald. Roy had known him for years without ever learning much about him. He came every morning, rode to the end of the line and back, bought a paper at the canal stop that he never seemed to finish reading. He had watched the hatchling every day with that quiet, sad look and never once said a word about it out loud. Roy told him the same short version he had told Walter. Gerald listened without interrupting. When Roy finished, Gerald folded his unfinished paper and tucked it under his arm. "I know someone at the Aldrin ward," Gerald said. "An old colleague. I will send word today so they are expecting you. So the staff know what is coming and have time to prepare the mother." Roy stared at him. Gerald looked out the window as if he had said something perfectly ordinary. The woman from the post hall was on the tram that morning too. Her name was Sarah. She had whispered about the hatchling to her friend weeks ago, but that had been surprise, not unkindness. She had watched it every morning since with the careful attention of someone who was thinking about something they did not yet know how to act on. When she heard Roy talking to Gerald, she leaned across the aisle. "How far is the walk from the east tram stop to the ward?" she asked. Roy told her. Sarah nodded slowly. "That road has loose stone in 2 places and a narrow underpass. Not easy for small clawed feet." She paused. "My brother works the street maintenance on that road. I will ask him to check it this afternoon." Roy looked at her. She shrugged one shoulder. "He owes me several favors," she said simply and turned back to face forward. By the end of Roy's shift that day, without any announcement, without any meeting or plan written down on paper, 7 people knew what was happening and 6 of them had already done something about it. Lena had the travel passes sorted. Gerald had sent word to his contact at the ward. Sarah's brother had walked the east road and filled the worst of the loose stone before evening. Walter had spoken to the driver on the connecting route, a steady man named Dale who said he would hold the tram an extra 2 minutes at the bridge stop if needed, no questions asked. 2 regular passengers Roy barely knew by name had packed small parcels of food and left them at the tram yard with a note that just said "for the little one." Roy stood in the yard at the end of his shift and looked at everything that had gathered around him without him asking for any of it. He did not know what to say. Walter clapped him once on the shoulder and went home. The next morning Roy was at the stop early. The hatchling arrived at its usual time, satchel held close, eyes already pointing toward the end of the line out of habit. It stepped onto the tram and moved toward its seat in the back. Roy stepped into the aisle gently, not blocking, just present. He held up the piece of paper with the ward address written clearly on it. Below the address he had drawn a simple shape, a large dragon and a small one, side by side. His wife had helped him with the drawing the night before. She had a steadier hand than him. The hatchling stopped. It looked at the paper. It looked at Roy. Its small eyes moved back to the paper and stayed there for a long moment. Roy kept very still. He did not reach out. He did not speak. He just held the paper and waited. Then the hatchling looked up at him and made a sound. Very soft, very low. Not a word in any language Roy knew. But the meaning of it moved through the air between them as clearly as anything spoken. Roy nodded once. The hatchling stepped forward. It did not take Roy's hand. But it walked beside him to the door, close enough that its wing brushed his coat, and that was enough. Outside, the city was already moving around them, and somewhere ahead on the east side, a ward door was being made ready, and a mother who had been too weak to send word was about to receive some. The morning was cold and pale when they set out. Roy walked beside the hatchling through the canal streets toward the first tram stop. The hatchling did not run ahead or fall behind. It stayed close, its satchel held in both claws the way it always was, its eyes forward. It had not let go of the paper Roy gave it. It held that too, carefully, like it was something that might disappear if it loosened its grip. Lena was waiting at the bridge stop exactly where she said she would be. She was a tall woman with a calm face, and she did not make a fuss when she saw them coming. She simply held out the travel passes, one for Roy and one sized for a smaller hand, and fell into step beside them without a word. The hatchling looked up at her once. Lena looked back, steady and unhurried. The hatchling looked forward again and kept walking. Gerald was at the connecting stop on the far side of the bridge. He had his unfinished paper under his arm the way he always did. He had also brought a small wrapped parcel which he held out to the hatchling without ceremony. The hatchling took it and looked inside. Soft bread and a piece of cold roasted meat, the kind that dragons liked. It looked up at Gerald with an expression that Roy could not fully name. Gerald nodded once and looked away at the street, giving the hatchling its dignity. Dale held the East tram exactly 2 minutes longer than the schedule called for. He did not announce it to the other passengers. He simply waited, and when Roy and the hatchling and Lena and Gerald all came around the corner and climbed aboard, he closed the doors and pulled the tram forward without a single word about the delay. The passengers on the East tram were strangers to Roy. But 2 of them noticed the hatchling and moved their bags without being asked, making more room near the seats by the window. One woman smiled at the hatchling, small and quick, not expecting anything back. The hatchling did not smile. But it watched her for a moment before turning to the window, and something in its face had shifted very slightly, like a door not yet open but no longer fully closed. The east side of the city was different from the canal streets. The buildings were lower and more spread out. There were wide yards between them and long flat roads that the morning light came down without interruption. Sarah's brother had done his work. The path from the tram stop to the ward was smooth and clear, the loose stone filled, the worst patches leveled. Roy noticed. He did not say anything. He just noticed. The Aldrin Recovery Ward was a long low building set behind a row of old trees that had gone orange and red with the season. The entrance for larger creatures was on the side, wide and gently ramped, with no steps. Gerald's contact, a quiet woman named Anne who worked the front desk, was already outside waiting when they came up the path. She looked at the hatchling with careful eyes. "We told her this morning," and said to Roy quietly, "that someone was coming. We did not say who. We did not want to say too much in case." She stopped. "In case something went wrong on the way. But she has been awake since we told her. She has not slept." Roy nodded, and led them inside. The ward was warm and smelled of medicine and clean hay. The corridor for larger patients was wide, with high ceilings and soft light coming through long windows. Their footsteps were quiet on the stone floor. The hatchling had been calm all morning. Quiet and steady the way it always was, that deep stillness it wore like a second skin. But as they walked down the corridor, something changed. Roy saw it happen. The hatchling's nose lifted slightly. Steps slowed. Its claws tightened around the satchel and the paper and then loosened again. Its wings, folded flat all morning, shifted once against its back. It had caught a scent it knew, and stopped outside a wide door and pushed it open slowly. Roy stood back. The hatchling stepped inside alone. The room was large and quietly lit. There was a long low bed built for a creature much bigger than a person, and on it, resting on her side with one great wing folded over her and one lying flat, was a dragon. Adult, dark green, with deep scarring along her left side that was still healing in long pale lines across the scales. She was thin. Thinner than she should have been. Her breathing was slow and careful, the breathing of something that had learned to be gentle with itself out of necessity. Her head was raised. She had raised it when the door opened and she had not lowered it since. The hatchling stood very still just inside the door. The satchel dropped from its claws. The paper dropped too, floating to the floor without a sound. Then it crossed the room in 4 quick steps and pressed itself against its mother's neck and made a sound that Roy heard through the open door and would not forget for the rest of his life. Not loud. Not the sound of something breaking. The sound of something that had been holding itself together for a very long time finally being allowed to stop. The mother dragon brought her head down slowly and curved it around her child. Her great scarred side rose and fell. One clawed foot moved to rest across the hatchling's back, gently, the way you cover something small and precious against the cold. Roy stood in the corridor with Lena and Gerald and Dale and Anne and looked through the open door. Nobody spoke. After a long moment the mother dragon raised her eyes. She looked at the people standing in the corridor one by one. Roy laughed. Her eyes were deep gold and very tired and full of something that had no name in any human language he had ever heard. He held her gaze and nodded once. She lowered her head back over her child. Roy reached out and pulled the door closed softly, leaving them to it. Outside, the autumn trees were burning orange and red in the morning light, and the city moved on around them the way cities do, and Roy stood on the path with a small group of ordinary people who had done a quiet and necessary thing, and none of them felt the need to say a single word about it. The hatchling never rode the tram alone again.